The Teen Titans have had so many different rosters over the past 60 years that even hardcore DC fans lose track. From the original Sidekick squad to full-blown Academy lineups, every era brought a completely different team to the table. So today, I'm breaking down every single Teen Titans roster and what made each one matter, starting with the 5 kids who invented the whole concept, the original Fab Five. Before the Teen Titans existed, teenage superheroes had exactly one job: stand next to their mentor and look impressed. Robin held Batman's flashlight. Kid Flash ran behind the Flash. Aqualad did whatever Aqualad does, which honestly nobody was entirely sure about even then. They were supporting characters in someone else's story, and that was supposed to be the ceiling. Then on April 30th, 1964, DC Comics did something nobody expected. They gave the sidekicks their own book. The Brave and the Bold, Josh 54, brought together Robin, Kid Flash, and Aqualad for a story where all the adults in a town called Hatton Corners just vanished. The villain was a guy named Mr. Twister, which is exactly the caliber of name you'd expect from 1964. But here's the thing. The story wasn't about Mr. Twister. It was about proving these kids could carry a narrative without Batman or the Flash standing behind them. And it worked. By July 1965, Wonder Girl joined the team. Donna Troy brought superhuman strength and a backstory so confusing that DC is still trying to figure it out decades later. At this point, the team had enough momentum to earn their own ongoing series, and Teen Titans #1 launched in February 1966. 4 teenagers with their own comic. No adult supervision required. But the Fab Five wasn't actually 5 yet. Speedy, Roy Harper, didn't become a formal member until Teen Titans #19 in February 1969, nearly 5 years after the team debuted. Once he locked in, though, the roster was complete. Robin led. Kid Flash brought speed. Aqualad handled anything underwater. Wonder Girl was the heavy hitter. And Speedy was the guy who brought a bow to a superpowered knife fight and somehow made it work. This lineup ran from 1964 all the way through the end of the 1970s. Over 15 years of teenage heroes proving they didn't need their mentors to be relevant. And the wildest part? The franchise they started has outlived most of their mentors' solo books. Batman's, fine, obviously. But Aquaman's solo series? Let's just say it's had some gaps. The original 5 established the entire template. Every roster that came after either built on what they created or deliberately tore it down and started over. Either way, it all traces back to these 5 kids in a book that DC probably expected to last 12 issues. But if the originals built the foundation, the next roster turned it into a skyscraper, the new Teen Titans. When people say Teen Titans, this is the team they're picturing. Not the original Fab Five, not any of the later rosters. This one, and there's a very good reason for that. In November 1980, writer Marv Wolfman and artist George Perez essentially detonated a bomb inside DC Comics. They launched the new Teen Titans through DC Comics Presents the Zeitschrift 26, and in doing so, they introduced 3 brand new characters that would permanently alter the franchise. Raven, Starfire, Cyborg, 3 names that didn't exist before this book, and now you literally cannot imagine the Teen Titans without them. The full roster combined these newcomers with returning members Robin, Dick Grayson, Kid Flash, Wally West, Wonder Girl, Donna Troy, and Beast Boy, who was now going by Changeling because apparently a rebrand was in order. But here's the thing, this wasn't just a new lineup, it was a completely different kind of comic book. Every single new character brought psychological weight that the original team never touched. Starfire was a Tamaranian princess who had escaped intergalactic slavery. Just, casual backstory stuff. Raven was a shadow-powered empath whose father was literally a demon, and her entire existence was basically a ticking clock counting down to the apocalypse. And Cyborg was Victor Stone, a young man rebuilt with cybernetic enhancements after an accident nearly killed him, now wrestling daily with whether he was still human at all. These aren't sidekick problems. These are real, ugly, complicated stories about trauma, identity, and survival, and the series leaned into all of it. Hard addiction, racism, intimate relationships, identity crises that weren't metaphorical. Wolfman and Perez treated these teenage heroes as actual people with actual damage, not junior versions of their mentors waiting around for permission to matter. The result was a book that genuinely rivaled the X-Men in popularity throughout the entire 1980s, which is not a sentence you could confidently say about many DC titles during that era. This wasn't just a good comic. For a lot of readers, it was the reason they they walked into a comic shop at all. The run lasted from 1980 all the way through 1996, 16 years. It survived Crisis on Infinite Earths, multiple renumberings, and roughly a dozen editorial shakeups that would have buried a lesser title outright. And during that entire stretch, it established the franchise pillars that every single adaptation since has borrowed from: the Robin and Starfire romance, Raven's ongoing struggle against her demonic heritage, Beast Boy's ability to be genuinely funny while also carrying real emotional substance, Cyborg's question of humanity becoming one of DC's most enduring character threads. All of that started right here, with this roster. Every cartoon, every movie, every reboot owes this team a debt it can never fully repay. But Golden Ages don't last forever. And what came next was, well, a creative choice. One that involved shrinking a grown man down to lead a team of teenagers nobody had ever heard of. The 90s Adam Lee D team. Okay, so here's where things get weird. In October 1996, DC launched Teen Titans Volume 2 and decided to do something nobody asked for but everyone secretly needed. They handed the keys to the entire franchise to Ray Palmer, the Atom, a fully grown adult man who got de-aged into a teenager during the zero-hour crossover event. And then they said, yeah, lead the Teen Titans. That's your job now. This was the first time in the history of the franchise that someone other than Robin was leading the team. Every single iteration before this had a Robin at the helm. Dick Grayson, Tim Drake, didn't matter. Robin led the Titans. That was the rule, and DC just threw that rule in the garbage and replaced it with a shrunken scientist having a second puberty. But here's the thing. The roster wasn't just missing Robin. It was missing everybody. The core team consisted of Argent, a silver plasma-wielding teenager named Tony Manetti, Risk, real name Cody Driscoll, basically a super strong adrenaline junkie, and Jodo, also known as Isaiah Crockett, who could generate extreme heat. If you're sitting there thinking, I have never heard of any of these people, congratulations, you're in the majority. These characters debuted as Titans members. They didn't come from other books. DC essentially built an entire roster out of characters with zero name recognition and a leader who used to be a middle-aged physicist. The series lasted about 24 issues before wrapping up in September 1998, making it one of the shortest-lived Titans eras in franchise history. When Ray Palmer eventually left, the whole thing collapsed. No Robin to fall back on, no Starfire, no Cyborg, no safety net. The team disbanded and most of these characters faded into deep-cut obscurity. But here's where it gets interesting. Despite lasting barely 2 years and featuring a roster that most casual fans couldn't name at gunpoint, this era proved something important. It proved the Teen Titans concept was elastic enough to survive without its legacy characters. You could strip away Robin, strip away every recognizable face, hand the whole operation to a de-aged scientist and a bunch of unknowns, and the idea still worked. Not spectacularly, not for long, but it worked. The franchise didn't die. It bent, it stretched, and it held together just long enough to matter. Was it a commercial juggernaut? No. Was it the era anyone puts on their best Titans runs list? Also no, but it was a necessary experiment. DC threw everything at the wall, and while most of it slid right back down, the wall itself stayed standing, which is, not nothing. And that wall was about to get a fresh coat of paint because the next era brought together a group of young heroes who would redefine what the Teen Titans could be. The Young Justice era Titans. Here's where DC decided to do something nobody expected. Instead of just relaunching the Teen Titans again, they built a completely separate teenage superhero team and ran it alongside the existing Titans at the same time. 2 teams, same universe, zero coordination between them, which is, not confusing at all. Young Justice launched in September 1998 and centered on 3 characters who would go on to define an entire generation of DC fans: Robin, Tim Drake, Superboy, Connor Kent, and Impulse, Bart Allen. These weren't sidekicks waiting around for their mentors to hand them missions. They were legacy heroes, kids who inherited the mantles of the biggest names in comics and then immediately started doing their own thing. Writer Peter David understood something fundamental about these characters that a lot of writers before him had missed. Teenagers with superpowers shouldn't just be mini adults with capes. They should be chaotic. They should be messy. They should absolutely not be trusted with anything important. The vibe was completely different from the traditional Titans. Where the Titans had always carried this weight of responsibility and melodrama, Young Justice was fun. Genuinely, unapologetically fun. 3 teenagers with way too much power and not nearly enough supervision, just bouncing off each other like pinballs. Impulse alone was basically a walking disaster generator. The kid could move at super speed but had the attention span of a goldfish on caffeine, and the book leaned into that energy hard, and the roster kept growing. Wonder Girl, Cassie Sandsmark, joined and became the emotional anchor of the group. Then came Arrowette, Empress, Secret, Flamebird, Batgirl, Stephanie Brown, Beast Boy, Lagoon Boy, Lil Lobo, and The Ray. Across 55 issues from 1998 to 2003, DC proved that you could run multiple legitimate teenage superhero teams simultaneously without either one feeling redundant. Tim, Connor, Bart, and Cassie became the core four that fans latched onto with an intensity that honestly hasn't faded since. These four had chemistry that most teams spend decades trying to manufacture. But here's where it gets dark. In 2003, DC published Titans Jar Young Justice, Graduation Day, and the title wasn't metaphorical. It was a funeral. The crossover killed both Donna Troy and Lilith Clay, two characters with deep roots in Titans history, and used their deaths to collapse both teams into a single unified franchise. No more parallel teams, no more fun, just grief, and the realization that these kids had graduated into a world where people they loved actually died. One day you're cracking jokes about Superboy's jacket, the next you're standing at a memorial for someone who was supposed to be invincible. It was a gut punch. The kind of story that takes a generation of characters who spent years goofing around and saving the world with a smile and forces them to grow up overnight. Tim, Connor, Bart, and Cassie walked out of Graduation Day as fundamentally different people. And that transformation, that shift from lighthearted team-up energy to genuine earned loss, is exactly what made them the emotional backbone of the franchise for the next decade. But the real payoff of all that pain? It set the stage for one of the most beloved Titans runs ever written, the Geoff Johns 2003 team. If the new Teen Titans was the franchise's first golden age, this is the second. And for a huge chunk of the fan base, this is the definitive Teen Titans roster. Not the cartoon, not the 80s. This one. And honestly, it's hard to argue with them. In September 2003, Geoff Johns and artist Mike McKone launched Teen Titans Volume 3 with a roster that had zero business working as well as it did. The lineup was Robin, Tim Drake, Superboy, Connor Kent, Kid Flash, Bart Allen, Wonder Girl, Cassie Sandsmark, Starfire, Raven, Cyborg, and Beast Boy. 8 members pulled from 2 completely different team legacies. Johns took the Young Justice generation, the kids who'd been running around in their own books since 1998, and fused them directly with the heavy hitters from the Wolfman and Perez era. On paper, that sounds like a recipe for a bloated, unfocused mess. In practice, it became one of the most critically acclaimed and commercially successful Titans runs in franchise history. The genius was in the balance. You had Tim Drake's tactical leadership grounding the team, Superboy and Kid Flash bringing raw power and speed, Wonder Girl holding her own as the team's emotional backbone, and then the veterans, Starfire, Raven, Cyborg, and Beast Boy, providing legacy and experience. It felt like a passing of the torch and a team-up at the same time, but rosters shift. Starfire departed and was replaced by Speedy, Roy Harper, starting in issue 21. Superboy left the active roster in issue 26. And then Infinite Crisis happened. Here's where it gets dark. Superboy was killed in Infinite Crisis number 6. Not sidelined, not written out, killed. And the series never fully recovered from that loss, which is kind of the point. Connor Kent's death became the emotional centerpiece of the entire run. It changed Wonder Girl's character trajectory. It changed Robin's. It changed everything. Because Tim Drake, the guy who's supposed to be the most level-headed Robin in Batman's history, responded to his best friend's death by repeatedly attempting to clone him using advanced technology. Every attempt failed. Tim kept trying anyway. That's not a superhero story. That's a grief story. And it's genuinely one of the most compelling arcs the franchise has ever produced. Post-Infinite Crisis, the team looked completely different. The roster shifted to Robin, Wonder Girl, Cyborg, Ravager, Rose Wilson, Deathstroke's daughter, because apparently that family can't stay away from the Titans, and Kid Devil, a smaller, scrappier team carrying the weight of everything they'd lost. Johns eventually moved on, and the series passed through the hands of Sean McKeever, Felicia Henderson, and J.T. Krull. The book ran for an unprecedented 8 years, finally ending in October 2011. 8 years. For context, most comic runs are lucky to last 3. This one just kept going, through crossover events, roster changes, and multiple creative teams, and people kept reading. That's the power of getting the foundation right. Johns built something so structurally sound in 2003 that it survived nearly a decade of changes without collapsing. The Young Justice kids grew up. The Legacy members found new purpose, and Superboy's ghost haunted every single page after he was gone. It was the peak, and what came next made sure everybody knew it, because DC was about to hit the reset button on literally everything. The New 52 Titans. Here's a fun way to thank fans for decades of loyalty. Erase everything they care about and tell them to start over. That's essentially what happened in 2011 when DC pulled the trigger on Flashpoint, a universe resetting event that wiped DC continuity clean and replaced it with the New 52. Every title got a fresh start, every character got a reimagined origin, and the Teen Titans, a franchise built on emotional continuity stretching back to 1964, got handed a blank piece of paper and told to figure it out. Teen Titans Volume 4 launched in November 2011 with Tim Drake, now operating exclusively as Red Robin, assembling a brand new team from scratch. Not new members joining an existing legacy. New as in these characters had zero memory of any previous Titans roster. The Wolfman and Perez era? Never happened. The Johns era that fans had just spent 8 years falling in love with? Gone. Every carefully constructed relationship between Superboy, Kid Flash, Robin, Wonder Girl, and Cyborg was functionally deleted from existence. The founding roster included Red Robin, Superboy, Wonder Girl, Kid Flash, and Solstice, with Bunker and Skitter joining shortly after. On paper, some of those names look familiar. In practice, they were almost entirely different characters. Superboy was a significantly altered version of Connor Kent, carrying none of the emotional baggage that made the pre-Flashpoint version compelling. Kid Flash wasn't even the same person underneath the mask. Wonder Girl was still Cassie Sandsmark, but stripped of the relationships and growth that had defined her for years. And then there was Tim Drake himself. His Zero issue revealed a reimagined origin where he was a would-be Olympic athlete and computer genius who caught Batman's attention, which is fine, perfectly serviceable, but it replaced a version of the character that readers had spent over 2 decades investing in, and that's the kind of trade that leaves a mark. The series ran for roughly 34 issues through July 2014, 3 years of a team existing in a continuity vacuum, deliberately cut off from the decades of history that gave previous rosters their emotional weight. The core tension of this entire era was simple. Could you make people care about the Teen Titans if you removed everything that made people care about the Teen Titans? The answer was complicated. New fans found a perfectly functional superhero team book. Longtime fans felt like they'd been asked to pretend their favorite characters were strangers. Bunker was a genuinely fresh addition that brought real diversity to the roster. But the weight of what was missing hung over the entire run like a fog that never quite lifted. The New 52 Titans weren't bad. They were just orphans. Characters with familiar names walking around in a universe that had no memory of why those names used to matter. Cool. That's also a thing that happened. But if the New 52 was DC's attempt to prove the Titans could survive without their history, what came next was the exact opposite experiment. Rebirth didn't just bring the legacy back. It made the legacy the entire point. The Rebirth Titans. Most superhero teams form because of some noble shared purpose. A cosmic threat, a mutual enemy, a desperate last stand. The Rebirth Teen Titans formed because a 13-year-old kidnapped 4 people. In November 2016, DC Rebirth launched Teen Titans, Rebirth #1, and it immediately set itself apart with one of the most unhinged team origins in comic book history. Damian Wayne, Bruce Wayne's biological son and the current Robin, decided the world needed a new Teen Titans. And rather than, asking anyone, he literally abducted Starfire, Beast Boy, Raven, and the new Kid Flash, drugged them, restrained them, and woke them up in a room where he gave a presentation about why they should be a team. Here's the thing. This wasn't random characterization. This was Damian Wayne, distilled to his absolute essence. Raised by the League of Assassins, trained to kill before he could read, and possessing the social skills of a particularly aggressive house cat, he genuinely believed these 4 heroes were individually weak, but collectively unstoppable, and his method of proving that was to demonstrate how easily he could capture all of them solo, which, to be fair, is a pretty compelling argument. Terrifying, but compelling. What made this roster fascinating was how deliberately it pulled from multiple eras. Starfire, Beast Boy, and Raven were legacy picks straight from the Wolfman and Perez New Teen Titans era. The new Kid Flash connected to the Flash family mythology, and Damian himself represented something unprecedented. Every previous Robin who led the team had been Dick Grayson or Tim Drake. Damian was the first biological Wayne to take charge. Not a circus kid adopted into the family, not a genius who figured out Batman's identity. An actual Wayne by blood, with all the entitlement and chaos that implies. But here's where it gets complicated. The Kid Flash on this team wasn't wasn't the Wally West most fans knew. This was a new Wally West, a different character who happened to share the same name, and during this exact same era, the original pre-Flashpoint Wally West also reappeared in DC continuity. Two Wally Wests, same universe, same name. I don't know what to tell you, but it actually added genuine intrigue to the Kid Flash role. Questions about identity, memory, and which version of a hero counts as real became baked into the team's DNA. The Rebirth Titans existed in a strange and kind of beautiful space between eras. The New 52 had stripped away decades of fan-favorite history, and Rebirth was DC's attempt to restore what was lost without fully admitting the New 52 was a mistake. This team was the embodiment of that tension. Classic characters returned to the roster, but led by a new Robin with zero patience and a philosophy built on pragmatic brutality rather than inspiration. Damian didn't give speeches about hope. He gave tactical assessments and expected compliance. It worked. The abrasive leadership, the generational friction, the legacy weight of putting Starfire and Raven alongside a Wayne who would sooner threaten you than thank you. It all worked. But if you think Damian's approach to team building was unconventional, wait until the Titans stopped being a team entirely and became a school. The modern Titans Academy. Think about this for a second. Dick Grayson showed up in 1940 as a teenage sidekick in short pants, fighting alongside Batman because someone at DC thought that was a good idea. And now, over 8 decades later, he's a professor, Professor Nightwing, standing at the front of a classroom in Titan's Tower, teaching the next generation of superheroes how to not get themselves killed. If that doesn't make you feel something, I don't know what to tell you. In May 2021, DC launched Teen Titans Academy, and it fundamentally changed what a Titans book could be. Instead of another team roster, another lineup of young heroes punching their way through a villain of the month, they turned the entire franchise into a school, a full-blown training institution where the original new Teen Titans served as faculty. Nightwing, Starfire, Raven, Cyborg, Beast Boy. The kids who once proved that sidekicks could stand on their own were now the ones doing the teaching. And the name of the school? The Roy Harper Titans Academy, named after Arsenal, their dead friend. The guy who started as Speedy in the original Fab Five struggled through decades of personal demons, fought alongside nearly every version of this team, and didn't make it. Every single day these characters walk into that building, they're reminded of what this life costs. That's not just a setting, that's a thesis statement. The student body was massive. Billy Batson, literally Shazam, enrolled as a student. Bratgirl showed up from Gotham with zero patience. Alinta brought Aboriginal Australian heritage and a completely unique power set. Gorilla Greg was, and I cannot stress this enough, a gorilla named Greg. Chupacabra was there, a kid called Chupacabra just going to superhero school like it's community college. The roster was the most diverse in franchise history, and each character brought a different background, a different set of problems, and a different reason for being there. DC even published the Teen Titans Academy 2021 yearbook, and it functioned exactly like what it sounds like. Student photos, faculty bios, the whole thing, as if someone in Titan's Tower had access to a printing press and way too much school spirit. But here's what made this iteration genuinely special. The ensemble approach meant DC could run multiple character arcs simultaneously. Romance, moral dilemmas, power development, identity crises, all happening within an institutional framework that gave every storyline natural structure. You didn't need a cosmic threat to justify the team being together. They were together because they were in school. The drama came from the characters, not the plot, and the emotional weight is impossible to ignore. The sidekicks who spent decades proving they weren't just junior versions of their mentors are now raising the next generation to do the exact same thing. Starfire, who arrived on Earth as a refugee with nobody, is guiding kids through their worst days. Raven, who spent years terrified of her own power, is teaching teenagers how to control theirs. Cyborg, who struggled with whether he was still human, is showing young heroes that what makes you different is what makes you valuable. Beast Boy, who masked his trauma with jokes for literally 40 years of publication history, is finally in a position where his experience means something beyond comic relief. That's over 8 decades of character evolution distilled into a single premise. The franchise came full circle, not by rebooting, not by killing everyone off and starting over, but by letting these characters grow up and become the mentors they never had. Dick Grayson went from Robin to Nightwing to Professor Nightwing, standing in a school named after his dead best friend, teaching kids he'll never let down the way the world let him down. That's not just a comic book, that's a legacy. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.